Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Principles of Bidding and Estimating. We have an exciting presentation here for you today, and we're all glad that you can make it this evening. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you have a question, please use the chat or raise your hand feature to ask your question. If we're not able to get into your question in time, I'll make sure to send over the questions to our presenter so that they can give you a response as well. Cameras, we encourage cameras to be on during the session period so that we can kind of interact and have this be an interactive period. Please keep your microphone on mute unless you're speaking. And be an active participant. Please use the chat feature to introduce yourself and ask questions. We want this to be as engaging as possible and for you to get the most out of it. And if you're able to, please change your name to name and company name. Our presenter for today is Robert Lowry. Robert joined Meriwether & Williams Insurance Services, a Hub International company, in December of 2018. As a field support project manager to support contractors with current projects and bidding process. After working as an owner's rep, consultant, project manager for both a large general contractor and a minority contractor, Robert brings over 25 years of project management experience to the contractor development programs. Robert obtained his Bachelor's of Science in Engineering Technology from Old Dominion University. Okay, that is what I have for right now. I'm going to hand over the presentation to Robert now.
All right, thank you. So Jane is also one of our team members. She's a senior contract development manager. She's going to be co-presenting with me. So Jane, if you want to do a quick introduction of yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're so excited that you've joined us. My name is Jane Olaiwola, and I'm a senior contractor development manager over at Meriwether & Williams. I have about 10 years of experience in commercial construction management. I worked for several large GCs across the country and actually started out my career working for interiors subcontractor in the Midwest. So looking forward to kind of sharing some of our experience and knowledge on bidding and estimating with you all.
All right, thank you, Jane. So everybody can see my screen, correct? Okay.
Yes.
All right, we're going to go ahead and jump into this. So, we're going to get started kind of with a little bit of, navigating the bidding process through our program. First, you need to get enrolled to a program. If you're not already enrolled, please do that. We'll make sure that you have the link to get the enrollment form. And then once you get enrolled to the program, the next step is you're going to be doing an onboarding process with a contract development manager that has been assigned to your account or to your business. And within that, they will be developing a work plan. And this work plan is tailored just for your business only, not like a boilerplate. Doing this onboarding, they will ask questions to get to know you and where you would like to take your company. And then if you don't have your certifications, we highly recommend you to get all your certifications. It is a process. It's not like an overnight process to get your certifications. Then the next is get your bondability. If you don't have a bond line, start working on that now. There is a quick qualifier that's like 2-page application that you get your bondability. And the reason for this bondability is for your payment performance bond or bid bonds to know, what is your sweet spot of projects to go after. And then after that, you're ready to do business after you've been working with your contract development manager for a while. And then you find your opportunities that are out there. So at this point, you're ready to do business. We do send out weekly publications with different opportunities in there. Make sure that you're receiving those, going through there. Attend pre-bid meetings. If you're a trade partner and there's some of these bigger projects out there, attend these. They're virtual. you get to know who's in the industry, get your networking out there. So that's kind of the steps you need to go through to be ready to do business and to grow the capacity of your business. Jane, you have anything else you
Yeah.
want to add to this? Yes.
Yeah, that's a great run through of just, the criteria that they need to make sure they have in place before they can actually start, bidding and estimating. Yeah, so looking forward to the next slide, and I can take that.
Okay.
All right, so we want to introduce you to, just quick vocab that you've learned over and over and that you've heard. So the first one is construction bidding. Right, and we just wanted to clarify that, for instance, you're in this meeting, it says, bidding and estimating. What is the difference between bidding and estimating? And that's what we're here to clear up. So when you're making a bid, it's a process of providing your potential customer, whether it's a prime, whether it's a sponsor agency, with a proposal of how you're going to build and manage the construction of this project that they want, right? So it is the method in which you're letting this client know that you're interested in, offering your services to the project. It's a method through subcontractors can also pitch their services to general contractors as well. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so I just want to chime in. So also it's like, what are you going to be bidding? What are the requirements? How are you getting paid? Incidentals, those like that is part of this bidding process that Jane is going to be talking about right now.
So there are three major decisions that kind of frame the construction bidding experience, right? So there are three main points that you need to know and understand for you to be successful in your attempt to submit this bid, all right? And they shape the decisions that, the owners make and shape what that construction project experience will be like for you. So the first is which project delivery method is going to be used. And this just talks about what role is the contractor going to take in this process. Is it going to be a CM at risk? Is it going to be a design build, or is it going to be a design build project, right? What role is a contractor playing? Is a contractor helping with the design, or are they just implementing what's already been designed? Okay. And then the other criteria that you need to understand is the procurement method. And this means that we're asking what criteria is the client using to rank the bids that they received, right? Are they going based on best value? Are they going based on a low bid? Is it going to be negotiated? Is it based on your qualifications? Or are they going with a single sole source? So it's really important to understand the procurement method as well. And then lastly, it's key to know the contract type, which tells you how the pricing for the project will be structured, right? So is it a lump sum, or is it a GMP, or is it a target price, or are they looking for a unit price from you? So you need to have all those information to be able to fully respond to this bid solicitation opportunity. Next slide, please. So now that we've defined what bidding is, right? It's the process of letting a GC or a prime, a client know that you're interested in taking a part in building their project for them. Now let's define what estimating is. Now, estimating is the process of putting together your price, right, to the client, to the GC, right? So the estimating is just a part of your bid that you're submitting, right? And estimating is both a science and an art form. So we say that it's a science because there are quantifiable criterias that you can measure and you can find out from a project, right? But then there are also some, ephemeral, some artistic portions to estimating that you only gain from experience. There are unknown unknowns factor that are harder to quantify, that are harder to measure. So you need to combine both, math and science, and also using your experience to mitigate, risk, and to mitigate how much unknown factors that you know. And we say that it involves using both your intrinsic skills as well as your learned skills, right? It involves a lot of, well, it's a really risky industry, so it requires taking a measured risk, right? There's some positive risk and there's some not so positive risk. And it's the estimator's job to identify those risks and also come up with a plan to address those risks in your pricing. So just some suggestions and examples of some risks that you might encounter. So some of those risks might include unclear scope of work, right? Some other risks can include uncoordinated drawings or conflicting drawings. Maybe the 8 sheets, the architectural sheets say something different, but then when you get to the civil plans, they say something completely different as well, right? So if they're uncoordinated, that's a conflict and that's a risk because you don't know which is correct, right? Another source of risk is unforeseen conditions, right? So oftentimes, especially if it's a renovated project, it's impossible for you to know ahead of time everything that you're going to encounter. So let's say that, you're doing some demo work and you're reworking a portion of scope of work. You don't know what might happen when you open up a wall, right? You might meet surprises. So those are some risks that you have to sort of plan ahead. As much as you don't know how much risk you have to be willing to accept that there will be some risk and plan ahead for that, okay? Another major source of risk could be weather delays, right? Once you do start construction, but it's also an estimator's job to sort of anticipate that and give yourself some room, some contingencies in case of those risks. Now, it's not all negative risks. There are some positive risks as well. They include opportunities for value engineering, right? So maybe you can find like or similar products that have the same specifications and qualities that has been specified, but they might have they might have a more cost-effective alternative that you can present, to your client, for approval. So that's an opportunity to save your client some money, especially if the budget is already tight. Okay. And also, this is an opportunity to prove your prowess, to prove your know-how, to prove your capabilities to your client, to your colleagues, right? And continue to build a stronger relationship for the future, right? Because sometimes not all projects are based on low bids. Sometimes they're based on your qualifications, right? So your present performance will indicate to the people that you work with about how capable you are and how they'll consider you for future jobs. So it's really important to seize the opportunity to consider every job that you're estimating, to look for the positive opportunities to build stronger relationships too, and to land repeat work in the future as well. All right, so the estimator should realistically, coherently, and comprehensively evaluate and communicate all those risks and all of those intrinsic and learned knowledge that they might have about the job. That is easier said than done. And there's a lot of tools that you have in your toolkit that you can use to make sure that you have that as much knowledge about this job as you can, as you are estimating, right? So things that you might want to do include going to job walks, right? Reaching out to subcontractors for their expertise, and sending in RFIs, either to your client or to the GC or to the engineers, to the design team as necessary, just to make sure you have as much clarity in the very beginning as much as you can, knowing that, of course, there will be some surprises over the course of the project, but planning to be better able to respond to those surprises as they come up. Now over to you, Robert.
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the process here. I know this is probably a little blurred, but it's better known as the go, no-go process for estimating. When to start the whole process is, okay, you're going to obtain these opportunities, these bid information. You like Jane and I just talked about, go to the pre-bid meetings, to see if it's something that you really want to bid on. That's that decision to bid. So you're going to dig a little bit more into, the owner requirements. You're going to look at the instructions. You're going to look at the time of when this job is going to start. There's a lot of decisions that you're going to go into that you need to consider to either go or no go. Another thing is if you're a trade partner and you're going to be going, bidding to a prime, is this a good prime that you want to bid with, you want to work with? Knowing a little bit of history about the owner, are there, good owners for projects? Do they pay well? Those kind of things. You want to do a little bit of research to find out, if it's going to be a good fit for you. As you are a small emerging firm here, my advice is do not go after everything, because number one, you're wasting time and money because you don't have a lot of overhead to be bidding everything, because you don't have a lot, other jobs to cover your overhead for while you're bidding other jobs. So you have to be very strategic and selective of, yes, this is a good one. And I know that, there's not a lot of risk that Jane spoke about, the risks with these, the unknowns and the unknowns. There is, with technology now, you can kind of tell if you're like, yeah, this is going to be good or not, or this is outside of my scope. This is a little too complex for me. So you have to be able to have a realization of go and no go. So if it's a no go, then it's done. But so you decide to go after this. Now you're gonna, you've got the bid documents, which will be the plan, the specs, the RFP or IFB or RFQ or whatever it has to be, all those documentations. And you're going to start going through that. You're going to start reading the invitation, the bid, all those documents, understanding the forms. While you're doing that, you're going to take the plans. If you're a general contractor, you're going to be getting your trade partners to bid on the scope. But you need to understand, okay, what is the scope of this project? What are the trades I'm going to need? Who are going to be my suppliers? All that is what's happening right now. So, most jobs, they're going to say, okay, you got 3 or 4 weeks to turn in your bid. So you've got all this planning to do when you're chasing the work. Then you have decided who's going to be your subs and your suppliers. And my advice is go after at least three per trade. So that way you get the best number, because this way you can tell if somebody's missing something or they're super high. You're also bidding this while you got you come up with your estimate while your trade partners and subs are bidding it for you to submit their numbers. So with also, then you're going to be looking at the schedule. So with the schedule, it's going to be kind of a high level construction schedule. And I'll tell you the duration of the project, if it's going to be phased, all that, because you're going to use that piece to determine your general conditions and general requirements. And with that, you're going to be building that while you're still getting your estimates on the different scope within your general conditions. Say it's, 100 days for this job. So you've got to say, okay, your foreman or superintendent is going to be 100% on the job. Now, with your general conditions, it's more of your management, admin people that's attached to the project, not your workers that's working in the field. That is not general conditions. So your foreman is not going to be working. He's supervising. So he or she is considered general conditions. You as a project manager, accountant, project engineer, all that is under your general conditions. There's miscellaneous things that goes under that. So you're going to take that duration of 100 days and determine the percentage that each person is going to be working. You know, your superintendent foreman is 100%. You as a project manager might be 25% of the time. So you can calculate your overhead from that cost. So that is the importance of it. And the next thing with that schedule, as you're looking at it, is determine, okay, do I need to put an escalation on this? Because it's going to start 9, 10 months away. But I've got to give a cost now because the current market is here, but you need to kind of know what the future market value will be at the time that you start. And there might be a clause in the instructions on the requirements saying, okay, bid with current market price. We will allow you to adjust at the time of signing the contract because public works could be 6, 7 months away before you get the signature of the contract. So all that is going on, with that. Then you got to determine if the owners want this work to be done during normal business hours, weekends. It's an acceleration. You're reading everything. Then you're going to be getting the forms for public works. Go through the forms, start filling them out if you're a GC, because as you know, it's low bid, responsive, and responsible. And what we can do as part of our service is to do a bid document review. We cannot give you numbers. Let's say that again. We cannot give you numbers. We can coach you and say, okay, this number kind of looks weird. Did you include? So we're making you do the work, but we're helping you to identify. Then the forms, we're going to go through the forms with you to make sure that everything is filled out. If it doesn't apply, put NA. If it needs to be signed, if it needs to be notarized, we're helping you because if you leave something blank, then they're going to say, okay, you're non-responsive, and then you get disqualified. Then reading the specs, understanding the product. So all that is going on. So now that you have told your suppliers and bids, okay, I need it back in X amount of days. So now that you have gotten everything, so now you're starting to take your estimate, your takeoffs, compare it to what you have received from your subcontractors and suppliers, and it's called bid leveling to make sure that it's right and to make sure there's no scope gaps. You're going to make, because you don't want to miss any scope. Yes, you want the low bid, but you do not want scope gaps because you're not going to get paid for any scope that you miss. And that's what going through the plans and making sure if you're electrical, don't just go to the E-sheets, look at demo, look at the reflective ceiling plans, look at it all because somewhere it's electrical is throughout, especially on the mechanical. You might have to run the conduits for the HVAC. So you need to understand everything, the plans. So once you've gotten everything together, you start putting your packet together, then you're going to start looking at, making sure that you're going to start doing your qualifications, which is what are you including, what are you excluding, any alternates, you're going to start putting that together. Value engineering, we like to see value engineering because if you are the successful bidder, and it's like, hey, this contractor is giving me options that can save me money, but that means I want to work with you because you're putting the time into it. So there's a lot to go in there. And so, you put your estimate together, your bid, and at this point, it's a bid package that you have put together with all the documents, signatures, and then you need to know when is it due. Do not wait until 15 minutes before it's due because something could happen if it's got to be uploaded, maybe 1 hour before, if it's got to be submitted in person, making sure that you have somebody there early. And then if you're still working on the bid, you can drive it to get it there or whatever it is, plan accordingly. You know, if you're a day early with it, which is great. So that's just some of the things that then you're going to submit it. And then if you are a successful bidder, you'll be notified that, hey, I'm the successful bidder. Then you'll go into the next process. But if you weren't the successful bidder, you can ask for a debrief, with whoever it was that you submit your price with to see where you were off. So that way you can become better at it. We can also do debriefs with you, but that's if the GC or the owner is not able to do that. We can also assist you with that. So that is the whole process. So at this point, are there any questions before we move on? I know we've covered
Yes,
a lot, so let's answer some questions at this point.
Yes.
we have a question oh, do you want to take it over?
Yeah, so yeah, I started responding to this. We probably have the same question in mind. It's from Patrick Pickney. So Patrick says, how do you negotiate unforeseen conditions that are far beyond expectations? Hi, Patrick. This is a great question. And I think first, once you do come across a unforeseen condition, what you would consider an unforeseen condition, the first step would be for you to do investigation on the documents that you were provided, either at the start of the job or in the beginning, whether it's on your drawings, whether it's your geotechnical reports, whether it's your contract that you signed with the owner or the GC, whatever documentation you were provided, you want to go back, you want to review it to make sure that you haven't missed something. If you miss something, you have a lot less negotiating power because the client, the GC or the agency are likely to say, we gave you that information. For instance, if you hit a water table, if the water table was a lot higher than you expected, maybe you thought it was at 10 feet, but it turned out it was like 5 feet, and somehow you missed that in the soils report, they're not going to be as willing to negotiate, right? But if there was no soils report or if it was never mentioned, then you can prove, look, I never had this information. And there was no way I could have anticipated that I would have discovered this unforeseen condition. Right. So you in that point, you start the negotiation, you estimate what it will cost you to accommodate this new condition, right? If you hit the water table early, maybe you need to, get a pump out there. Maybe it's going to require more labor hours, what have you. Maybe it's, who knows? Maybe you have to think about water drainage, to pipe that water away. Just all those things that you have to now consider and price for. I would put that together on a change order, and then you would reach out to the GC and say, look, we came up across this condition. We didn't have any documents that notified us of this. There was no way we could have known. And this is only the amount that I provided because my assumption, as you can see in my notes and clarifications in my assumption sheet that I provided along with my original estimate, I had no idea this was going to happen. So I didn't carry anything for it. So Mr. GC or Mrs. GC, now I do have this change order for you. And then the negotiation starts, right? And the client, the GC, they may have carried some contingency, right, in their internal budget that they might be able to release for you to cover that cost. And they probably will be unwilling to cover the whole amount, right? But maybe they'll cover a portion, maybe you'll agree to do a 50-50 split. But that's usually how you can approach that. Most people just want to share the responsibility, share the risk and move on to other aspects of projects because you don't want to stall, you don't want to waste time unnecessarily. So that's really probably the best way to approach it without the use of legal instruments because that could be definitely lead to other repercussions. Does that answer your question, Patrick?
Really, my question is, you run into unforeseen circumstances, and the unforeseen circumstances can be large, right? Like the water table issue that you brought up.
Mhm.
And you can assess what the recovery might be, the dollar recovery might be in the actual work. But
Mhm.
now you've extended your time on that job. And
Yes,
I noticed people put in like time and material, but that time and material, most guys I know, most GCs I know, are looking at the labor cost, the material cost, and maybe the equipment cost. But then there's the general condition costs, which are now extended. So
yes,
how do you is that something that you put in the estimate? Was say your op-
absolutely,
operating costs
absolutely,
for the general conditions are like $1,000 a day? We go ahead and we put
absolutely.
those general conditions in the in the in the
In
in the
your change
change order.
order.
In the
Yes,
change
you
order.
can,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
Especially if this affects the critical path of your project, and then the overall schedules were to be delayed, then yeah, it's absolutely within your right to input. In fact, you should be doing that, otherwise you're aiding that cost, right? If it's gonna
Right.
affect your overall schedule, definitely wanna input that. You might not get the
Right.
full portion of it back, it's going to be a back and forth, right? But you should
And
definitely.
I recognize that it's dependent on the exact circumstance, right? If it turns out you're building on top of a volcano and nobody saw it, then
Right.
you know I'm not breaking that cost out with anybody. If you want me to continue to build, it's
Right.
on you, right?
All right. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. You,
All
you,
right, onward.
I just
Thank you.
I just want to also add on that you're right. Every time you do a change order request, add in those extra days. Because sometimes they're going to give them to you, sometimes they don't. Because they say, hey, you can get this done within your current scope. But she's like, but no, I estimated 100 man hours. I need another 6 man hours because of this. So you always, and you're right, Patrick, about saying what your daily general conditions are, because that is the key every time that you're going to do a change order. They're going to tell you what the markup is. If you're performing, they might say you can do a 10% markup. If you're managing somebody, you can only mark up 5%, right? That's your admin on it. But like I said, time and material, if you really don't know what it is, say, hey, I need a number really quick because we need to keep this project going, you can give them a ROM, rough order of magnitude, and time and material of not to exceed, then you're going to be tracking your labor and material daily. So that way you're tracking on that change order. So there's a number of ways to keep the job moving, but you have to let them know right up front once you find these change in scopes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for your help.
Okay. Are there any other questions in the chat there? Are we good? Okay.
I believe so.
Okay.
All right. So this slide goes over just some of the key components that you'll want to review as you're putting together your estimates. A lot of you have seen these components before. If you haven't seen any of these before and you have a specific question, feel free to put it in the chat so that we can address it. Okay, so let me go over just like the typical standard components that you typically want to be considering as you're putting together your price, right? You definitely want to be doing drawings, looking at drawings and reviewing drawings in detail, every sheet. You also want to review sheets that may affect your work. So if you're an electrician, you're not only looking at the A sheets, you also want to coordinate with the A sheets. You also want to coordinate with the structurals as well, right? That's where you're catching errors, right? You want to look through your specifications book. Everyone knows specification books. They're quite thick, right? They're quite lengthy, right? But you have spec codes that are assigned to your scope of work. So make sure you're reviewing your spec scopes in the spec book, because you will own that. And if you don't deliver what has been specified in the spec book, you will be liable. You might be liable for repair work. You might have to get new equipment. So that's really important to review all of those. Now, in every construction bid, right, there's always supplemental documents that you have to review, whether it's residential, whether it's commercial, especially in public work, right? There's a lot of documents that each of the agencies are requiring you to review. Make sure you read them. Make sure you scan through them. I know some people like to use some tools to kind of quicken the process, but I would still scan through, use the pages of content to your advantage, use the search tool in the PDF reader for key terms to make sure that you've, at least made a good attempt, a good faith attempt to understand everything that those bid documents are telling you. Scope sheets, sometimes GCs will issue you scope sheets, or sometimes sponsor agencies provide you a template that they want you to respond to, with line items. Make sure you fill those out, because that's what they use for leveling. If your scope sheet is incomplete or not done at all, then you've submitted a bid that's not complete and responsive, right? So you're not a bidder that they can take seriously, that they can trust. You may have disqualified yourself, right? So it's really important to make sure that you are filling out all the scope sheets, that you're using the units that they requested. Don't make up your own. If they provided a scope sheet that they want you to use, if they provided a template that they wanted you to use, that's going to be the metric that they're going to compare all the bidders against, so that they can compare you guys apples to apples, right? If you make up your own, it's going to be more difficult for them to compare the bids, and it could disqualify you or make the bidding and awarding process much longer. All right, budget breakdown. If you want to just showcase how you've come together with your total estimate, you can do that as well. Depending on whatever instructions that they may have given you, or whatever template or forms that they may have included in your bid documents. All right. It's also really good practice for you to either review and approve the schedule that's provided in a bid document, or create your own schedule, right? Because you want to really imagine how you're going to implement this work, right? So you want to have a good idea of the timeline of how long it will take you to actually implement the work. You want to think about the logistics. You want to think about the equipment that you're going to need, just like the temp construction requirements that you'll need to have in place. Do you need temp power on site? Things like that. Coordination, you always have to work in coordination with other trades, with other contractors, with other GCs. You're never going to have a free space where you're just working on your own. So you have to consider that. You have to coordinate, you have to build relationships, and that will make that easier. Sometimes you will also be provided a BIM model, a computer aided design BIM model, for you to sort of look through the different scopes of work, to do to look at conflicts. Maybe the MEPs, the electrical, is conflicting against the structural steel. You might want to find that out in the BIM model before you build it on site. So that's where that's useful. That will save you money and time, right? And finger pointing on site. All right. So you also want to look at constructability. Have they provided you something that is impossible to build? If they have, let them know right away. Submit an RFI. Okay. When in doubt, submit an RFI. It just makes the process better, because first of all, whoever you're sending the RFI to knows that you're invested, that you're taking the time to look over this, that you're offering your expertise or your suggestions, right? And then also, if there are ambiguities, you want to minimize those, right? So once you send those RFIs and they send that response to everyone. So everyone has the same amount of information, and there's less assumptions. And it just levels the playing field a little better, right? It makes everything just easier to compare. So when in doubt, submit an RFI and submit it by the due date, please. All right. And then again, this is just a repetition. If you're aware of any potential issues, submit an RFI. Subs, GCs, clients, sponsors, they want to know as soon as possible. So always communicate as early as you can. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so I just want to chime in real quick before we move on. So within these bid documents, if you're a trade partner, you should see, or a GC, there should be a sample of the contract that's in here, so you know what's in the terms and conditions that you're bidding on. So that is real critical with some of these documents. And if there is no sample contract, ask for one. Because within that contract, there might be language of pass-throughs. You know, some of their own requirements might have to be passed down to your first, second tier members as well. So understand if they're pass-throughs. So that is the key thing there is what I want to say. And also, when she was talking about your budget breakdown, you know, if you're a GC and you don't have a number for a certain scope or activity, do a plug number. And that goes back to having historical data that Jane was referencing. Because, you know, you're under the gun and all of a sudden it's like, oh man, I don't have, you know, fabrication, you know, specialty metals, miscellaneous metals. You're like, okay, I can go back to my sheet. I know what it is. Let me plug it in there. So that way, as a general contractor, you have a complete scope that, you know, a complete thing. You can go back later and then find somebody to pick up that activity. You know, it could be a structural steel and say, hey, can you carry this for me? So you can negotiate, but get those numbers in there. And also with when lump sum, do not put your general conditions and profit in the scope of work above the line. Keep it separate, even though you submit it as a lump sum. Know what that is. Keep those numbers separate, but that's how you get to your lump sum. So I just want to add that in. Any questions so far?
We have a couple questions in the chat.
Okay.
What about unexpected rise in materials? I think this was in reference to the how do you negotiate unforeseen conditions that are far beyond any expectations?
So the first one is rise in costs. Okay, so that is the thing, you know, it'll tell you in the instructions of the bid how many days or weeks that you need to honor your price. And then if it's more than that, then if you're a successful bidder, then you have the opportunity to go back and redo your numbers because they took longer than the 90 days to award the job. So your numbers are not valid because they're going to tell you to hold it for 90 days. If it's 93 days, you get to go back and redo your numbers. That's one thing. And then as I mentioned earlier, is if this job is 6-7 months away, you kind of need to know what that escalation cost is going to be on material and labor and factor that into your price. Because you do not want to go in and say, oh, I didn't cover that, you know, in the 6 months down the line. You're going to be losing money because you didn't account for that as you're bidding the job. So you got to do your due diligence while you're bidding and putting your estimates together to get the numbers of where it's going to be.
Yeah, I agree with that, Robert. So when you submit a bid, you want to be clear for how long that bid is valid for. Is it valid for 30 days? Is it valid for 60 days? Is it valid for 90 days? In special cases, especially in the kind of economic environment that we are right now, that's a really great question. Sometimes they will issue you specific special instructions saying, make sure you're carrying the material cost escalation through the end of the year 2026, right? So make sure, that's why it's really important to read your bid document to make sure you're capturing those sorts of requirements and that you're pricing that in. If they gave you that instruction and you didn't price it in, now you are open to having to cover that cost because you missed it, right?
And the other thing is, with those numbers that you have and you're the successful bidder, you've been awarded the job, with the next thing you're going to be doing is buy out stuff early. Do not wait 6 7 months because you have not locked in your suppliers with that current price. So once you have them on the contract, they're going to have to honor that price. If you wait months and months and months later to write them a subcontract agreement or PO, they're like, hey, I was not on the contract, this is my new price. You're going to have to eat that cost. So just be aware of buyout process. Do it early as soon as you can. Get everybody locked into those prices. Any other questions? I'm just looking. We got about another 30 minutes here.
Yes,
Okay.
Jane, I think touched on the other questions. There's one that just came in. Is there something other than lump sum? Is increase in cost over time a separate line item?
Okay, so Patrick, do you want to elaborate on that? Regarding the lump sum, we're going to sort of cover that in the next slides. But in terms of increasing costs over time,
Okay, so if it's in the bid documents that we are to consider Trump tariffs, were to consider cost increases over the next year, and
Mhm.
we don't know what that's going to be, right? So we're
Mhm.
getting lumber from Canada. It could be as much as 150%. And you're
Mhm.
buying a 2x4 for $10 now.
Mhm.
And you're looking at 150%, you're buying it at $25 in the future. That's a huge cost increase.
Mhm.
Put that cost increase in as a separate line item so that if it turns out we're not seeing 150% tariff from Canadian lumber coming in, then the client isn't required to pay it.
Okay, I see your point out. Yeah, that is excellent. You definitely do want to break it out. But also it's going to be highly subjective on the instructions that you were provided in the bid documents by the GCs, during the bidding process. But you definitely want to call it out. You want to include it in your notes and clears. You want to qualify it and depending on whether they want you to put it in the base bid, if they want you to put in the base bid, you can do that, right? And make that, sum up to your total cost. Or alternatively, you can just have it as an alternate, right? So you've done the pricing and say, if you want us to hold the price till the end of the year in 2026, it's gonna cost an additional 10%, 50% increase for the millwork scope or what have you, or for the framing scope or what have you. And you just have that as an alternate so that you have a rough estimate for them, but it's not calculating in your base bid.
Okay, so then one more question.
Mhm.
Before we leave here, I know we were running out of time, but when you're talking about purchasing, like say for example, HVAC, we
Mhm.
can get from our HVAC suppliers a notice that says in 90 days, the HVAC equipment's going to increase by 10%, right? So we want that
Mhm.
10% savings. We want that 10% savings for the clients. Is
Mhm.
it legal actually to ask the client for that money now to purchase that equipment for the 10% savings?
It's worth a shot. It's worth when you get those communications with your manufacturer, especially with something as substantial, as HVAC ducting, it's worth a shot.
Okay,
Forward that
so,
email to
so
your
that's
GC. Yeah, and
okay. So
say,
that's just a
look,
question of
yeah.
the dynamics between say the GC, me, and the client.
Yeah, you want to
So that
communicate, you want to
okay,
open, they might want to hear it, they might not want to hear it. It depends on the circumstances.
okay,
If they're still working on getting the funds released, they might not want to hear it. They might be willing to, to take on that 10% increase. But if they're looking to save costs, they might say, sure, we can consider this as an early release package. So an
Yeah.
early
There
buyout.
we
So
go.
you buy it now, you lock in the price before it increases, and it's a cost savings to the client.
Okay, that was the term I was looking for. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and just to add on to that one too, I know is like Jane was saying, buy it early, and then you can invoice them if you got it's called stored material. So you get it early. If you got a warehouse to put it in, then you can go ahead and invoice for that. Instead of waiting until you have to put it in there because you got to pay your supplier, right? So
Right.
that's how you can get paid for that stored materials by getting it early to save them. The other thing you talked about was tariffs. Is you are looking into public works, you're going to see a phrase in there, buy America, buy America. So they want you to buy the products in the United States and it's got to be made by Americans. So you might see that in there. So that will get away from tariffs because it's something that's got to be purchased in the United States, made, manufactured in the United States. If that
Well,
makes
we've
sense.
been seeing that for a long, long, long time.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been there a long time. So that kind of gets away from that tariff that happens. But there
Yeah.
are times when there are something that needs to become imported, with light fixtures, you can't really get that in the United States, some of the stuff that they want. But in general, that's how they get around the tariffs on public works, the majority of it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, so Hani has
Oh,
another question, which is actually very appropriate, very apt for this next slide. Question, consider how general contractors have their subcontractors and remain loyal to them. Do you have any advice on how to get a foothold? It seems that with partners that we're working with, we keep securing projects while those we aren't working with are only sending bid invites to compare costs. Additionally, do you recommend any platforms? Yeah, so those are really, really great questions. A key role in what a GC does is that they want to minimize risks, right? They want to deliver a great product to their clients at a great price, right? So they're juggling those several key criteria that they have in mind as they're working on completing project, right? So it sounds like some GCs that you have a great relationship with, but it might be harder with others. And there's never just one answer to why that's happening, where some people are just using it as a check number, as a backup number, where you never seem to land a job with them. Whereas you have a good relationship with others. There's always the human factor, right? So it's how well does, the estimator know you and your team? How well do you perform? Once you get out of estimating and you get into project management, and field execution, can they trust you? Can they trust that when you get an estimate from you, that it is complete, it's well considered, it's well priced, and then once you get awarded that job that you're going to execute, that your office is very responsive, you're on time, they bill on time, they provide submittals on time, and also in the field that your superintendents meet the schedule, have great safety standards. So all those factors come into play to sort of keeping a relationship. So it's not only about, just pricing, but how is your overall performance in all the key areas of your interaction with the GCs? So that's what I would consider as you're trying to build relationships. Also, if you find that you're providing, so let's say you've provided 10 estimates to GC and you haven't gotten a single job, that's significant, and that's something you can bring up. So sometimes subs bring this up, but they don't bring it up in the most productive way. They're frustrated, but my advice to you would be to bring it up in a way that's really productive, and call up their estimator or their chief estimator, whoever you have a relationship with, and say, hey, you know what, I noticed we submitted the past 10 bids and we didn't get the job. Is there a reason why? Can you give us a feedback? Is it a price? Is it something that we did? So it's really important to, um, have those conversations. It might be something that you did or not. It could be just something that they're looking for that somehow you're just missing the mark. And in terms of platforms, the one platform that I would recommend is Building Connected. You're gonna find public work and private work opportunities on Building Connected. A lot of the large users are on there. And also, if you are on there as a subcontractor, if a GC is looking for a subcontractor that does that trade, and you're in their geographical area, they will reach out to you. So make sure your information is up to date. Make sure that when they call you, you pick up and you're professional. Make sure that when they send you a bid invite, that you respond on time. And when you say you're gonna bid, right? You don't back out at the last minute because they're taking notes and they're scoring you. You might not know it, but that's happening, right? And that can affect your opportunity of getting future work. Does that answer that
There's-
question?
Yeah,
Connie?
thank you. Yes.
You're welcome.
There's
John?
a hand raised and a couple more questions in the chat. Do we want to go through the presentation a bit more and then we'll get through the questions?
Okay,
Let's,
sounds great.
yeah.
All right, so just the key things, other key things to increase your chance to win and to continue to build that relationship. If they ask for budgetary pricing once in a while, Prime will need to do that before they actually get awarded the job. Maybe they're still competing for that job. Respond in a timely manner, be considered, offer your expertise. Follow up. If they don't reach back out, follow up, take the initiative to follow up, and request for their feedback. All right. Again, if they provide scope sheets, fill out their scope sheets, check it off, confirm that you have everything covered. Don't leave any ambiguity, any guesses. Meet all your deadlines. So if you get a bid invite and you have to decide internally, do that as quickly as you can. And once you make a decision, don't change your mind because they remember that if you do, especially if you back out last minute. Okay, attend job walks. If you have VE ideas, present them, right? They might go with it, they might not, but if there's an opportunity, if there's a value engineering opportunity to save costs, especially in this economic climate, definitely take that time to communicate that because they will appreciate that and it will show them that you are invested in the job as well. All right, I'm going to turn it over to you, Robert.
Okay, so I'm gonna quickly go over this because I know that Jane kind of talked about it, the three methods here. You know, the project delivery method, you know, CM at risk, design, bid, build, and design, build. You know, as with public agencies, you know, you're gonna see the three of these, but majority of the time is gonna be design, bid, build. But if it's a complex project, it's going to be the design build. And so the difference is, the design build, they shift the risk from the owner to the general contractor is the main thing. And also it allows the job to be completed sooner. Design, bid, build, all the risk is on the owner and his design team because they did the design, they put it out to bid, and you're building it. So and it takes longer to get through the process of reviews before they can put it out on the street to bid. So, those once briefly touch about that procurement methods, best value. Jane was just talking about value engineering, alternates, all that is showing that you are invested into this project by giving them solutions, alternative solutions. That's what sometimes you're going to be scored on is what's value can you bring to the team? How many years experience do you have doing this type of project? That's the value because we know that I have confidence that you guys can get this done right. This is not your first one. The communication of your team, your superintendent foreman that's running the job, what experience, how they communicate with the owners. All that has to go in there. The low bid is low bid, but there's factors that's got to go in there. There's times where it's a negotiated. Sole source is another. If you're the only person that has that, that product, they're gonna sole source it to you. Contract types, cost plus your fee, guaranteed maximum price. That is where you're gonna give a number, but at the end of the project, if there is unused fees, costs, that's going to be given back to the owner. There might be a clause in your contract where they'll share some of that unused cost with you. They're going to have a contingency sitting aside. So if there's change orders, they can go into the contingency to use instead of going back to getting funding. So GMP, is open book. It's not like, hey, you can just do an invoice for this amount and don't have to give backup, but it's an open book process. Lump sum, we talked about that. Is if it's 100,000 and you only need 90,000, you get to keep that 10,000, because it's lump sum. They're really not going to go back on the unit price. There are times where they want to see that unit price for certain things. So if there's change orders, they know what that cost is for that fixture. Or if it's a service contract, give me a cost per hour for this, and then they can work from that. That's what the contract types. Real quick, and then we'll go to some questions here. And we kind of talked about design, build, design, bid, build. So there's kind of a definition that you guys can use there. Let's get a couple questions here before we go on into takeoffs.
Jane has been responding to a lot of the questions.
Okay,
I
great,
think
thank you.
John, if you wanna, your hand is still raised, so if you have any additional questions, would you wanna state them?
Yeah, so John typed into the chat. This might be a great question for you, Robert. He said, is a bid a legal requirement, or can a firm change their mind and not provide service?
If you submitted a bid and you're the low bidder and you withdraw, and this is where your bid bond comes in, they can use your bid bond to go after the next person. There's a thing now on payments performance bond. If you decide to withdraw or whatever it is, they're gonna use your bond. They're gonna put a claim on your bond because they now have to go out and rebid it or go to the next person, and that price could be different. So you're gonna be obligated for that price differential if you walk away from a job. They could terminate the contract, then that's not you breaching your contract. Does that answer the question there?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yes.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Yeah, actually, I meant to say if it's a, I didn't mean a requirement. If it's a legal contract, if it's considered a legal contract. Essentially, you're answering yes, right? If we have a bond, here is a second step to my question, because we do a specialty and we're usually subs, and our contracts are pretty low. We don't require a bond.
Mm-hmm.
We don't do building. We provide engineering and consulting and prediction, these kind of things. So does that mean that regardless of whether we have a bond or not, we will have some kind of obligation? I mean, our firm is not signing a contract. The contracts are signed after the bid is decided, and we would be going under the general contractor that will be working for an agency. Post a typical scenario, at least for us.
Okay, so if there's no bond required, okay, that's great. But if they list you as a GC lists you as a subcontractor on their paperwork, and for some reason you say, hey, you know what, I don't want to do this, you haven't signed anything yet. There's no notice proceed that's been sent to you. So you could back out, but then they're gonna have to go back to the owner to fill out the forms for a substitute for you.
I see.
And that could raise their price. So it could be bad business for you if you walk away. you know, I would say if you can walk away before you submit the number, not after.
Scroll down, yeah.
So does that answer, help
Yeah.
John with the question?
Yeah, yes, Robert. Thanks. I appreciate it. That's we definitely not something we're planning on doing, but just to understand the legality of it.
Yeah, I mean, like,
We obviously we don't want to. We're obviously spoiling the relationship with the contractor, so that's understood. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, all right, thank you. All right, we got to keep rolling here.
Thank you. Thanks again.
Okay. All right, Jane.
All right, so why is takeoff so important? It's really, really important because it is the science part, right? It's a math part, it's the foundation of your estimate, right? And your estimate is only as good as your takeoff. So you want to make sure it's accurate. You want to make sure you're using the right scale. You want to make sure that you have reviewed all the drawings that are necessary to review. And you want to make sure that your pricing is right. Because if either your unit measurements are wrong or off, or if your pricing is wrong, then it's likely that your estimate will be inaccurate as well. You still have a chance, sometimes things kind of have a way of adjusting. You might be high on one scope and lower on another, and it can balance out, but it just reduces your likelihood of being an accurate bidder. You're more likely, if your takeoff is wrong, to get a call from a GC saying, you're way too low. We don't know what happened. Your bid is half the size. I mean, it's half the price of the nearest, bidder, or the other way, it's twice the size of everyone else who bid, right? So you really, really want to make sure that your takeoff is accurate and that it is complete. Next slide, please.
Okay. So here is a little bit on takeoff here. There's the traditional way, a manual. As you can see, there's different tools that we used to use back in the day. There's a little scale thing with a little wheel on there to do your linears and square feet. Then there's the ruler with the different scales on there, your highlighters, your calculators. Man, this was very time consuming and a lot of errors could happen because of the scales. The reproduction of the prints, has changed. And, so that was, now we're looking at the digital age here. Bluebeam is great. We've had classes to show you, presenters to show how to use Bluebeams to do your takeoffs, square foot, your counts, areas. And then we also have the On Center software. And then you have the symbol that's Autodesk. And now AI is starting to do your takeoffs for you. I have not used this program, but I'm sure there's others out there for you tech savvy people. But AI is becoming a norm in the construction industry now. They can do your schedules for you. They can write subcontract agreements, and they can now do these takeoffs. So it's just other tools that you can use, but you need to be able to understand how these numbers come up to check some of these AIs that's out there. So I just kind of wanted to show you guys some of that there.
Great, thank you, Robert. So this slide talks about the estimating and scheduling tools that are available at your disposal, right? So, if you're in construction, you might be using Excel sheets, more likely than not, from the smallest subs to the biggest primes. A lot of them still use Excel sheets. For takeoff softwares, you have multiple options. RS means is something that's sometimes used. It might be more appropriate for job contracts. And then also you have Bluebeam, which used to be primarily like a construction PDF reader, but it's a lot more robust and has a lot more tools, and also has takeoff tools on there as well. And then a legacy tool for takeoffs, it's very comprehensive. Most people You know, if they're not using this, they started off in their career using this, like I did, on screen takeoff. For project management tools and scheduling tools, there's so many options, and it seems like every day there are new ones that are coming out. But some of the industry standards include PlanGrid. They include FieldWire, of course, Procore. All the biggest companies do use Procore. And if you're their sub, you might be invited to use their platform. So we want to get comfortable using that. And for scheduling, there is Primavera 6, P6, and we also have Microsoft Project. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just some final takeaways for you to consider as you're in the last stages of estimating, right? After you've estimated and you've been awarded a job, then you want to consider buyout. And Robert touched on some of things, key points earlier in the presentation. But when you're conducting your buyout, you want to create a procurement schedule to figure out what your lead times are, right? So if you're electrical sub and you have a switchgear that you have to deliver or some large equipment, make sure that you have enough time, right? For the manufacturer to produce that product to you and to get on site for installation. Other items have long lead, maybe glazing. Make sure that you have adequate time on that schedule, and that you also create your own internal schedule, including the time it takes for submittals. Account for the fact that it might take a couple of rounds, if maybe 1 or 2 rounds if you're lucky, but more likely than not, it might take several. You're not. So make sure you're accounting for that. Make sure you're accounting for when you need that on site to match up with the construction schedule that you have been provided as well. So those have to correlate. All right. If there are contract provisions that are being imposed on you that your subs, your tier 2, tier 3 subs also have to adhere to, whether it's, who knows, maybe it's insurance coverage. Make sure that they're aware of that. Make sure that they're carrying that and providing that as well. If there are any scope gaps that wasn't captured during the estimating process that you've noticed before you start mobilizing to the field, make sure that you try to eliminate that, you communicate that, you keep writing RFIs. You never stop writing RFIs, right? You write them during the bidding process, you write them during buyout, and you keep writing them once the project has started as well, right? And then also consider, this goes in line with your procurement schedule. If you find that, the lead time for an equipment is going to take much longer, and maybe you have a schedule for 9 months, but this equipment buying process is going to take you closer to a year. Maybe you want to buy that as soon as possible. You want to consider that part of your strategic early release package, right? So that the owner signs off on just the material costs on that, and also the warehousing costs that you might incur, and delivery and shipping and handling. And make sure that you have that ready for you to use, especially if it's like a major equipment that you're going to be needing, so that you're not stranded and without key scope, key equipment that you need. Next slide, please.
Okay. Well, we can now get to some of these questions. One thing I did want to add on when Jane was talking about long lead items, make sure that that is in your schedule, even when you're doing your proposal here, and you want to have a schedule in your bid packet, and show that long lead item, because it might be pushing out past what they really want, but it's reality. Submittals and shop drawings need to be included in your schedule, because that takes time before the clock starts to tick on that piece of equipment. So that can show you where your schedule could be, because if you're on that critical path and it's like, oh, I can't get this for 7 months, but oh, it's got to be here in 5 months. What do we do? And that's what she's talking about, buying that early. And, sometimes the owner might buy this equipment because they have a better price and they can get it during the, while you're bidding it. So it might be a note saying, hey, you provide the labor, we provide the equipment. So with that, now we can start answering some of these questions that we have.
Okay, what tool would be best used for trucking?
What tool we best use for trucking?
I assume software.
For pricing or tracking your trucks, you need to elaborate a little bit more on that, because that's if you're talking about how to price, for trucking industry, it's going to be, what your tonnage is, what your distance are. If you got to go to a certain landfill, are there any fees associated with that? The other thing is your hours. If your trucks, if they got to be hauling dirt and stuff off site, are they being staged, is by the hour. So that is, with that. And then if you're trying to be equipment, try to see where your trucks are. There are different programs out there that you can put, like GPS, and track your equipment when it's out on the road and stuff. But it's more for trucking it's just knowing your costs, unit costs, then applying that to the project. You still got to have your insurance, because if you're coming on property, you got to have, at least auto insurance. And I don't know if you need workers' comp. I think that answers your question there. I mean, that's more of a service, and hauling is a unique thing in the industry.
Okay, the next question we have is how can I get more in detailed information about early buyout?
Get with if you enroll into the program, reach out to your contract development manager, and then we can set up some one-on-one coaching to provide more information on that, because that is a case by case with early buyout.
Yeah, that's highly subjective. That will require a conversation with all the parties involved, right? Would you see the owner? Maybe they might be willing to do it, they might not, right? It's just work. You just have to reach out to whoever your prime is to have that conversation.
And have that during the bid, when you're bidding the job, not after.
As early as possible.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question is, what is the best tool to use for landscape bidding?
Bluebeam, because you can do your square footage, you can do linear, and then you can count the trees and the shrubs, using their legend that they have, and it just counts that you're going to be doing. If there's like mulch that needs to be brought in, you can see with the square foot. I would just use Bluebeam, nothing fancy for landscaping.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have, how do you handle an aspect of bidding proposals for a scope that is a little ambiguous and known? For example, estimated cost for rewiring and troubleshooting of existed deteriorating wiring conditions in an existing building.
Jane, I'm gonna let you start with that one. But that's more of a
Okay,
common
yeah.
material.
Okay, so for that, yeah, that is extremely vague. And you just have to start the conversation. That is, Mr. Prime, Mrs. Prime, Miss Prime, that is extremely vague. I have no idea what we're talking about. And you want to go to the job site. One thing that you might want to do as early as possible is maybe negotiate for early exploratory work. So if there's like a particular section of it that's really ambiguous, say, we really love to get in like really early, like maybe in between the bidding process. Well, as early as possible if they'll let you in, and maybe they can allow you to open up a portion of the wall. I mean, if the owner already owns the property or whatever. But this sounds like a situation where it's like a renovation. So if you can do like an exploratory survey in some areas to kind of see what the conditions are, that might help you sort of estimate a little bit better. Especially if you know like the counts. So probably what I would do is I would put an allowance. I would say there, I don't know, 50 locations where I know that the junction boxes need to be wired, I don't know. And then I would carry an allowance per location. And I would be really transparent about the allowance and say, look, this is just an allowance because there's no way I can quantify this. I have no idea. This is an allowance. If we use it all, we use it all. If we don't, we don't. Right? And that's the way to manage that.
Yeah, I mean, and that kind of can go back to, as you know, with deferred submittals, like your fire life safety, fire sprinklers, it's almost a design build. If it's so vague, then you was like, hey, like Jane was saying, hey, I'm gonna do an allowance. Or I can do, okay, a not to exceed number because it's so vague. And that goes back to, knowing your cost per square foot to get you a number when it's so vague. And like I said, if it's old materials, a lot of it's gonna be out of code. You got to account for that. If it's more than 20, 30 years old, the code has changed. So you're gonna have to allow for that. So when it's that vague, just say, hey, here's allowance for me to do this, a not to exceed number, time, material, something like that.
Okay, I think Jane has gone to the other questions. To that end, I want to say thank you to Robert and Jane for their wonderful presentation today.